Hey everyone, Sam here, and we gotta talk about the man who shot Chris Kyle. This is a graphic novel, uh, and this is kind of an interesting one because this is not an American graphic novel, it's actually a French one. Uh, this was written by Fabian Nury and illustrated by Bruno. That's his full name. That's his artist's name. If you know the French comic book industry, you'll know that there's a lot of artists who only go by one name. Mobius was one I know who did that too. So it's a pretty common thing for French comic artists. And this was originally published in France in 2021 in a bande dessinée, which is a bande dessinée is a French comic book. Technically French Belgian because they have a lot of overlap with their comic book industries. And bande dessinées actually have a huge industry. If you've ever seen uh, anything from Europe that's a comic book, there's a good chance it might have been a bande dessinée. Like Asterisk and I believe it's Asterisk and Obelisk, 1010. So they have a huge comic book industry over there. The YouTuber Razorfist had a good video talking about bande dessinée. I'll leave that in the description if you want to check that out. So this was originally published in a bande dessinée, but Titan Comics translated it to English and released this in February of 2022. So around a year later, Nury I'm familiar with because he actually wrote The Death of Stalin, not the movie, not the movie you're thinking of, but the comic that movie was based off, because The Death of Stalin was a bande dessinée, and Fabian Nury wrote that. And that comic was later made into the 2017 movie. It's a nice movie. I liked it. A very dark comedy, but I really enjoyed it when the couple of times I've seen it. But The Man Who Shot Chris Kyle. This is a graphic novel that examines the life of Chris Kyle, who was an American sniper who I believe has the highest, even today, still has the highest official kill count in American sniper history. But it also examines, as the title implies, the man who shot Chris Kyle, Eddie Ray Routh, and examines his life and what kind of led him up to killing Chris Kyle. And it also examines how Chris Kyle's death affected his family and the wider culture. So it's interested in a lot of different things, all of them kind of tying back to Chris Kyle and Eddie Ray Routh. So this is one book that I got because if you saw my last video, I did a video about a bunch of art books I bought. In that same catalog was actually this book. And I said, well, why not get this one? As it looked interesting, but also because I'm going to be starting a cinema channel here on YouTube too, where I talk about different films, movies, as well as television shows. And I was going to do a retrospective on Clint Eastwood's films sometime later this year. And I was interested in this book because, for those of you that don't know, Chris Kyle's story was adapted into the movie American Sniper, which Clint Eastwood directed. And this book actually has a chapter that talks about the production of American Sniper. Because for those that don't know, American Sniper was kind of a strange movie because most of it was shot before Chris Kyle's murder by Eddie Ray Routh. And it was only, I think it was like 6-7 months before the film was released that Chris Kyle was killed. So that's kind of an interesting element of the story, this idea that, this guy's life is being immortalized in a big budget Hollywood movie right as he's being killed. So that was kind of a weird element of that. So that was really what drew me to this. So I was very curious to see how this bande dessinée would portray that. So I thought I would talk about first what really works about this graphic novel. I would say the first thing that really works is that it really examines every single facet of the case. From Chris Kyle himself, to Eddie Ray Routh's background, to the filming of American Sniper, to Chris Kyle's widow, Taya Kyle, and how she deals with Chris Kyle's death. So it really covers a whole lot in this graphic novel, and it mostly goes by transcripts, either from the police or speeches Chris Kyle gave or televised interviews. It goes by that. Obviously, the writer Nury sort of simplifies some things, but he mostly is going by the actual transcripts of what was going on with these various events. One thing I did like is that the story has kind of an ambivalent attitude towards the people involved in this case. For the most part, there's one exception, actually two exceptions toward the end that I'm like, the artists are very, the artist and the writer clearly have a perspective on these characters that kind of like, I don't entirely agree with. But for the most part, the book itself has kind of an ambivalent attitude towards everybody, because it really shows things like Chris Kyle's personal flaws, which could be risky because, you know, you're pointing out the stuff that a decorated military hero did that maybe some people would be kind of irked at, but this story does bring up the fact that Chris Kyle lied about a lot of things. He exaggerated some of his military records. He slandered certain people that he didn't like. So it's very interesting that it really points out Chris Kyle's sort of his personal flaws that, you know, nobody was really going to bring up in American Sniper, given the fact he just gotten killed. And that was actually one of the main criticisms of American Sniper when it came out, was that it was kind of whitewashing some of what Chris Kyle did. But this one, it points a lot of the stuff out. The personal flaws of Chris Kyle out. Without necessarily vilifying him. Like, it's just sort of basically pointing out, yeah, he did this stuff. That wasn't cool. But it doesn't like do a thing where you're like, oh, I'm glad this guy got shot. It's like, no, it's just pointing out how he was not necessarily a paragon. He had his flaws. It also shows that Eddie Ray Routh is like he's a drug addict. There's no nice way to say it. He's a drug addict. He's unstable due to his drug use and his weird family life. It's it doesn't paint him necessarily in a flattering light, but it also points out that there are hence something else deeper was going on. So that was actually very interesting. One thing I noticed, and this was actually a really interesting thing they did in this comic, they really highlight the fact that a lot of American heroes are often created by violence and by inflicting harm on other people. Because, Chris Kyle, he became decorated for being a sniper and shooting hundreds of people. And it's kind of a thing of like, yeah, he was allowed to under the military conditions and not necessarily illegal in the circumstances, but it does point out that he was a hero for killing people. And the book seems to have sort of this deep critique of American ideas that, the idea that an American hero can only exist through violence and through harming others. And that's kind of and it points out how that can become actually a very dangerous mindset. You can create situations where people just sort of feel the need to be violent in order to feel like they have any impact on the world. And it's kind of revealed through both Chris Kyle and Eddie Ray Routh, because Chris Kyle, despite having this impressive military record, still feels the need to lie about his achievements. Like, despite him doing things that the military says, yes, that's very good, Chris Kyle, it's not enough for him. And he has to sort of push himself to be even exaggerate his achievements even further. And exaggerating his achievements in this case means killing more people just to feel like he's worth anything, despite having a already stellar record. And Eddie Ray Routh kills Chris Kyle. The text heavily implies because Kyle was a legend, and the best way to become a legend is to kill another legend. Like the guy who shot Jesse James. So the story really plays with that idea that America is very obsessed with violence and harm towards others, and how that just creates a bad mindset for people, which is very interesting acknowledgement. One thing I really liked, the section about the production of American Sniper was very interesting, because it actually shows how Bradley Cooper, who portrayed Chris Kyle in the movie, how that affected him simulating what Chris Kyle did as a sniper. And it talks about how Bradley Cooper had to do this like huge weight and diet routine in order to bulk up, because Bradley Cooper is normally fairly slim, but Chris Kyle was kind of a bear of a guy. So Bradley Cooper had to really beef up. And it shows that this idea of that Cooper is becoming affected by Chris Kyle by the fact that he has to basically become him. And even when he's shooting a movie, and obviously you're not actually killing people during the movie, Bradley Cooper kind of has this weird sensation turning into this man. And basically just looking at what that does, what an actor does, how it can affect them being other people. So that was a very interesting segment. I really enjoyed that. Now I want to talk about what didn't work so well in this book, and unfortunately, it's not really a whole lot. But the problem is that there's it's a lot of these. It's not a lot of things, but they're major things that kind of ruin the story, in my opinion. The first issue I really had is that the art style is a little too simplistic. Because here you look at these simplistic drawings on front, you go, oh well, that's just that's just a thing with the for the title. But you look at a lot of the interior illustrations, and they can be somewhat simplistic. Like this is the actual drawing style, and it's not necessarily bad, but it's kind of simplistic, and the problem is that the story is trying to imply these deeper ideas about what these people are thinking, but because the art is so simplistic, it sometimes doesn't do a very good job at showing what they're feeling, because this is a work that really requires the artist to be able to do subtle emotions well in order to convey what these people are thinking. And I just don't think Bruno necessarily conveys that very well. And the minimalism kind of works against what the story is trying to do, because since we can't really see their emotions drawn very well on their face, we really have to lean on Fabian Nury to tell us what they're feeling. And it's kind of like, well, that's a little clunky. Like, wouldn't this be better if the artist could just show what they are feeling by, showing their feelings? So the art style doesn't really work for me. One thing I wasn't a fan of is the point of the book after the American Sniper, when it's talking about the trial that goes on for Eddie Ray Routh. There's sort of this undercurrent of criticism towards Taya Kyle, Chris Kyle's widow, and it spends a lot of time having like this, it's not outright said, but it's very heavily implied, where the book heavily implies she's capitalizing on Chris's death by like gathering the right to his usage, his person, his likeness. That's the word. She like sues to get his likeness. She does like these commercials for these rifle companies. She like hawks these products for the Chris Kyle Foundation. And probably the most blatant one is the one where they say, oh, well, she goes to Eddie Ray Routh's trial, and then the next day she goes to the Oscars for the 2015 Oscars, because that was when American Sniper was showing. And it just kind of feels like this weird thing where they're like saying, oh, like she's a grieving widow to an extent, but she's like capitalizing on Chris Kyle's death. And I get the criticism, but something about it just sort of feels, I'm not sure I entirely agree with it. Because they kind of frame them in weird ways that it's sort of like, oh yeah, why are you, if you're so grieving, why aren't you like wallowing in your sadness? Why aren't you being sad in the way we expect you to? It's like it kind of has that vibe. Like it's just sort of like, oh, you're not sad the way we expect. It's kind of like what's going on with what's her name, Erica Kirk. I think that's Charlie Kirk's widow. And like there's a bunch of people like criticizing her for not being sorrowful in the right way. And that's kind of what it feels like in this book. Like they're saying, oh, Taya, you're not being sad in the way we expect you to be sad. It's like, how dare you try to, protect your dead husband's image and things like that. And it's sort of like, I get where the criticism is coming from, but it just kind of feels like, I'm not sure that's entirely a good faith reading of her actions. Like, it just feels sort of weirdly mean-spirited towards Taya Kyle. Again, maybe it is mean-spirited. Maybe she was profiting off Chris Kyle's demise, but, it's kind of that thing of, I'm not sure that's entirely fair in this, at least as it's portrayed here. Another thing that really bugged me is the portrayal of Eddie Ray Routh. For the most part, I think is pretty good. It does not shy away from his drug use, from his nasty behavior towards his own family and loved ones. But there's one part at the end, and I say the end because it's the epilogue, that after all of this book, like, not really digging too much into the characters' minds, they're always going by what has always been written down, what the creators can prove was said at one point. The epilogue throws that out, and it has this entire section where Newbie tries to insert a rationale for Ruth's murders, and it's very much based on supposition. It's not based on anything Eddie Ray Routh actually said. And it comes off as really hokey and forced. Like Newbie was saying, okay, I gotta find a way to tie this into my criticism of American hero making. How do I do that? Oh, I'm gonna say that Eddie Ray Routh thought he was the killer of Jesse James. Okay, I'm gonna do that. And it's like, and he tries to make it seem like Eddie Ray Routh is actually thinking that, but that's just the writer's supposition. It's not actually what he was thinking. So that came off as pretty hokey and forced. And I actually think it kind of ruins a lot of the book, because the whole point of the book was that it was using transcripts and hard facts to show the reality of the Chris Kyle situation. But at that epilogue, they just kind of throw that idea out and just say, oh no, it's just, we're going to put a reason in Eddie Ray Routh's head. And it just kind of goes, well, you've just kind of shot the whole point of the book in the foot. You've just essentially gone from this very grounded, very straightforward concept of like just focusing on the facts, staying close to the facts, and then you've just thrown that out at the end because I guess they didn't want there to be no firm explanation for Eddie Ray Routh's murders. And it's just kind of like they just don't stick the landing with the whole concept of this book. And it also kind of makes the framing of Taya Kyle a little suspect, because it's kind of like, well, you're willing to jump through hoops to give Eddie Ray Routh a strong motivation, but you're not like giving Taya Kyle any like good faith interpretation of her actions. And it's kind of like, yeah, it kind of shoots the book's whole point in the foot. So there's also a slight bit of hypocrisy in the book, because the book very much belittles the media for not acknowledging the death of Chad Littlefield. For those that don't know, Chad Littlefield was Chris Kyle's friend who was with him and Eddie Ray Routh when Eddie Ray Routh killed Chris Kyle as well as Chad Littlefield. And the book kind of has this wagging finger tone towards the media for not focusing on Chad Littlefield because Chad Littlefield wasn't the war hero. But then the book kind of excuse me. The book actually falls victim to this criticism because it kind of ignores him after a certain point too, and it's sort of like, well, why were you ragging on other people for not focusing on him when you weren't going to focus on him either? So that just kind of makes their observations somewhat tempered. Like, it doesn't have much bite because they're doing the exact same thing. Just a moment. I also think that the major reason this book doesn't entirely work is that there's very much meant to be a distance between you and the characters. Because, again, like I said, the idea of it is that we're going off transcripts and observable facts. We're not really getting into the character's head. But the problem with a mandated distance is that it makes it kind of hard to get emotionally involved. Like, it's meant to just be this scientific examination of everything that went on. But because you have that distance, it's hard to get invested in any of the characters. And it's kind of like, yeah, it doesn't, it just doesn't have much emotional investment because we are at such a distance that we're just kind of observing everything as a fly on the wall. And even a fly on the wall would probably feel something more with this than we do, because Nury and Bruno don't really let us get too close. And one thing that kind of bugged me was that there's this frequent use of talking heads, because a lot of the people, a lot of the scenes are of people on talk shows, whether it's Chris Kyle or Taya Kyle or Eddie Ray Routh's parents, and there's a lot of these talking head sections, and those sections feel kind of lazy because they don't change the artwork. Each art of each talking head is just repeated in multiple panels with no difference, no like shift of movement or anything. So, and some of the art is really lazy. To show people smiling, they just draw teeth, like this, only top teeth, like, and that's people smiling. And again, it's trying to be minimalistic, but a lot of times it just comes off as lazy. And I'm just kind of like, could you not have found something, a more interesting way, if you were going to use these talking heads, all these like talk show appearances? Couldn't you have like found a slightly more interesting way to show them? Like, can you show like these little shifts in movement, like the slight differences in facial expressions for each question? I mean, you have the resources to see that all these talk show things were recorded. You can see what the person's emotions actually were. And again, that's kind of why how the minimalist style of this book kind of betrays it, because Bruno is not drawing in a very specific and well-defined style. He's drawing in this sort of minimalist mush. And when the story very heavily leans on us being able to see the characters' emotions, the comic kind of falls flat on its face. And we have to rely a lot on Newbie to tell us what's going on. So, yeah, there's just, like I said, not a lot of things that are wrong with the book, but there's enough of but the things that are wrong are big enough that they kind of ruin the whole point of the book. It's like this is a book where it's an interesting experiment, but the experiment kind of fails because the author and the artist don't entirely succeed at what they needed to be able to succeed at in order to make this book effective. So my final ranking. I go by a 5-star system. 0 out of 5 stars is the worst. 5 out of 5 stars is the best. I have to give this one a 2 out of 5 stars, which is painfully average. And because this is kind of a frustrating book, because it has a very interesting concept. I think it does, for the most part, a good examination of this unique case. But the art is not stimulating enough. It doesn't quite work for the kind of story this is meant to tell. And the central idea is constantly underdone by both the art's minimalism and the fact that the author, it can't help but sneak in their perspective in a way that goes against the main conceit of the story. The idea that, oh, this is just the pure reality of what was going on. This was the this is what the artists show via things that they've gotten from transcripts and official documents. But they can't. But it falls apart because they keep inserting their own ideas. And it's kind of funny because the opening page has the typical disclaimer thing about how this book reflects the personal perspective of its authors, and for that reason it is subjective in its assessment of the characters it portrays. Like, it says that, but the execution of the story makes it clear, oh no, this is meant to be as close to reality as possible. But it's not. So it's kind of that thing of, this book is at war with the author's subjective view and its intent of, like, being a very straightforward examination of the case. So because of that, it kind of fails in its goal, but I think it does enough right to warrant 2 out of 5 stars. This might be interesting for people who want to learn more about the Chris Kyle case, but I'm not sure anybody else would be as interested in it. The artwork is not notable enough to get for the art, and the writing kind of shoots itself in the foot at a few points. So, yeah, not a very firm recommendation from me. Did I get any inspiration from this book? No, I can say it pretty firmly no, because the Chris Kyle case does not really interest me in the grand scheme of things. Like I said, I got this more just to know more about Clint Eastwood's role in the movie, in the American Sniper movie. That was the only real interest for me. And snipers as a concept are not all that interesting to me because in real life, sitting in one place for long periods of time where very little happens doesn't really excite me. The snipers are just not a concept that really interests me. So, yeah, no real inspiration from this. Alright, well, that is my review of The Man Who Killed Chris Kyle. I hope you found this review interesting, and I will see you again in the future for other comic reviews. Alright.